In 1975, the average American family saved 17 cents out of every dollar they earned. Today, that number is about 4. Your grandparents were not smarter than you. They were not richer. On paper, adjusted for inflation, most of them earned far less than you do right now. They just lived by a set of rules nobody bothered to teach you. Some of these rules built the entire American middle class. One of them was so good, the federal government made owning it a crime. One of them was your great-grandmother's health insurance, decades before anyone offered her any. And one of them printed more paper than the United States Post Office every single year, and then quietly vanished from your kitchen drawer. None of these were secrets. They were common knowledge. Then, one at a time, the people who profit, when you spend instead of save, made sure you forgot they existed. Here are 20 of them, and every single one still works. The first rule is the one all the others sit on top of. Pay yourself first. In 1926, a man named George Clason wrote it into a little book about a man in Babylon. But your grandfather did not need the book. The moment the paycheck came in, a fixed slice went away before a single bill got paid. Not what was left over. What was left over is always nothing. The trick was never willpower. It was order of operations. Saving came first, and spending fought over the rest. Then an entire industry got rich flipping that order. Spend first. Borrow for the gap. Save whatever is left, which is nothing. The rule still works. You just have to put it back in front. The second rule, never buy on time. Your grandmother would wait, sometimes for months before she brought a thing home, because buying on credit was something you did only when you had no other choice. That instinct did not appear by accident. It was a reaction to what happened in the 1920s, when the installment plan arrived and swallowed the country whole. By 1927, more than 60% of American cars were bought on credit. 80% of radios. A whole generation watched the bill come due in 1929 and taught their children one sentence: if you cannot pay for it, you cannot afford it. The installment plan never died. It just rebranded. Today it says buy now, pay later, in friendly lowercase letters. Same trap, cleaner font. Third, cash is leverage. Your grandfather paid in cash and he expected something for it because he knew the man behind the counter paid a fee every time a card got used. So he asked for a discount, and he usually got one. The card network spent decades making that illegal to advertise, because every swipe quietly hands them a few cents on the dollar, built right into the price you pay whether you use plastic or not. That rule is crawling back. Look at the gas station sign with 2 prices, cash and credit. Your grandmother saw that gap 60 years ago. She just kept the difference. Fourth, make your spending save for you. For most of the 20th century, your grandmother licked stamps, S&H green stamps, handed out at the grocery store and the gas station, pasted into little books, saved for a year, traded in for a toaster or a set of dishes. At their peak in the 1960s, 80% of American households collected them. The company printed 3 times as many stamps as the United States Post Office. 1,000 stamps were worth about $1.67 in cash, but nobody cashed them because the whole point was the slow, patient saving towards something real. Then the stores cut the program to save money, and points programs replaced them. The new version saves nothing for you. It just collects your data instead. Fifth, grow some of it yourself. In 1943, 20 million American families planted what they called victory gardens, and those backyard plots produced about 40% of the fresh vegetables eaten in the entire country that year. A nickel packet of seeds against the grocery bill. The dirt did not charge interest and it never sent a late notice. We were told that was wartime, a thing for the history books. But the food companies needed you buying, not growing. And plenty of towns quietly wrote the backyard garden out of the zoning code. The soil never changed when the war ended. We just decided buying it back was easier. Watch what happens to that rule the next time your grocery receipt doubles. So far, every rule has been about one family at a kitchen table, deciding what to do with their own money. The next 5 are different. Because your grandparents figured out something we have completely forgotten. The most powerful money moves were never made alone. They were made together. And that is exactly the part the banks worked hardest to bury. Number 6. They owned their own bank. In 1909, a group of French-Canadian mill workers in Manchester, New Hampshire pooled their money and started lending it to each other. The first credit union in America ran out of a volunteer lawyer's house. A Boston merchant named Edward Filene pushed the idea across the country, and he chose the word union on purpose as a weapon against the loan sharks who were the only option working people had. A credit union is not a charity. It is a bank you own. That is why, to this day, it usually beats the bank down the street on every rate that matters. Your grandfather did not get a better deal because he was clever. He got it because he was an owner. 7. Your neighbors financed your house. Before the bank and your phone, there was the building and loan, the little mutual society where the whole town's savings went to buy the whole town's homes, one family at a time. If you have ever seen the old Christmas movie where the banker tries to crush the small-town lender, that lender was real, and there were thousands of them. Then the savings and loan industry was deregulated, gambled, and collapsed, and Wall Street bought the wreckage. Your mortgage today gets sold to a stranger you will never meet within weeks of you signing it. The money used to stay in town. Somebody decided it shouldn't. 8. Your lodge was your safety net. Around 1910, by a conservative count, 1 in 3 adult American men belonged to a fraternal society. The Oddfellows, the Moose, the Maccabees. These were not just clubs. For a few cents a week, the lodge paid you when you were too sick to work, buried you when you died, and in many towns kept a doctor on contract who treated every member for a flat yearly fee. Ordinary people had built themselves health insurance and life insurance before the insurance companies would sell it to them affordably. The medical establishment called the lodge doctor an evil and fought to kill it. Today you start a fundraiser when you get sick. Your great-grandfather just paid his dues. 9. Insurance came to your door. There was a man who knocked every week, the insurance man, and your grandmother handed him a few cents for a policy that would keep the family out of a pauper's grave. Penny premiums, collected in person, building quietly for decades. The companies that did this became giants on those pennies. The fees were brutal, and the moment they could sell you something with fatter margins, the same companies let the little policy quietly die. But the bones of the idea were perfect, tiny, automatic, relentless. The modern version is the automatic draft you forget you signed up for. Your grandmother chose hers. She saw it leave her hand every Friday. 10. They banked in a circle. In communities the banks refused to serve, immigrants and working families ran savings circles. Everyone pays into the pot, and each week or each month, one member takes the whole thing home. No interest, no bank, no paperwork. Just a rotating fund built entirely on the fact that these people trusted each other not to run. It has 100 names around the world, and it funded small businesses and first homes for people the financial system locked out. There are apps now that do exactly this and call it innovation. Your grandmother called it Tuesday. Now stop and notice what every rule on this list has in common. Not one of them was a strategy. Nobody sat down with a spreadsheet. These were defaults, the normal, boring, obvious way that normal people handled money, passed down at kitchen tables, not in classrooms. And every one of them disappeared the same way. Not because it stopped working, because it stopped being profitable for somebody standing between you and your own money. Keep that in mind for the second half, because the rules only get sharper from here. 11. They bought cheap and stored it. In 1943, Americans bought 315,000 pressure cookers in a single year, up from 66,000 the year before, because the whole country was canning. A poll the next winter found 3 out of 4 households put up their own food, averaging 165 jars a year. The rule underneath it is pure arithmetic. Buy when it is cheap and plentiful. Eat when it is expensive. That is not nostalgia. That is buying low and selling high, done in a kitchen. The food industry sold us year-round convenience, and we forgot we ever knew how. The jars are still in the basement. 12. Buy it once. Your grandfather owned tools that outlived him. The rule was simple. Buy the good one, the expensive one, and never buy it again. A tool you own is a service you stop paying for. Everything around you now is built to be replaced, glued shut, designed to die just after the warranty does. That is not an accident. The company makes nothing when your blender lasts 30 years. It makes everything when it lasts 3. There is a fight happening right now over your right to repair the things you supposedly own. Your grandfather would not have understood why that was even a question. 13. Own the house fast. Before the 1930s, a home loan was short and the down payment was large. You paid it off in a handful of years, and then the house was yours, fully, with no one to answer to. The long mortgage that came later did a genuinely good thing. It put a home within reach of millions who could never have saved that down payment. But stretch a loan across 30 years and you can end up paying for the house nearly twice, with the difference going to the lender. The rule is not pay cash for everything. The rule is understand that time is the price, and the longer you borrow, the more of your house belongs to someone else. 14. They could read what their savings earned. Your grandmother had a passbook, a little booklet where the bank stamped her interest, simple and visible. In 1933, the government capped what banks could pay on those accounts to keep them from competing too hard. For a while it was stable, then inflation climbed, the cap became a cage, and when the rules were finally loosened in the 1980s, the banks quietly steered everyone toward products that paid them fees instead. The plain savings account never stopped existing. It just got buried under accounts that pay you almost nothing. The high-interest version is still out there. They just stopped putting it in the window. 15. And this is the one the government turned into a crime. They kept something outside the system entirely. For most of American history, ordinary people held gold coins because gold did not care if your bank failed. Then, in 1933, the federal government ordered Americans to hand it in at $20.67 an ounce. Refuse, and you faced up to $10,000 in fines or 10 years in prison. Within a year, the government repriced that same gold at $35 an ounce. They bought it low from you by law and marked it up overnight. Now, there was a real argument that it was a necessary crisis measure, but the lesson your great-grandparents took from it never faded. Every fight you hear today about gold, about Bitcoin, about money the government can't touch started in that moment. Owning gold became legal again only in the 1970s. 16. They made saving automatic and patriotic. Your grandparents bought bonds, a fixed amount taken out before they ever saw the money, locked away for years, backed by the full weight of the government. Boring, slow, guaranteed. Exactly the qualities the market spent the next 50 years training you to find embarrassing. The brokerage industry pushed it aside for products with better stories, worse odds, and a commission attached. But automatic, forced, safe saving is not embarrassing. It is the single most reliable way ordinary people have ever built money. The mechanism still exists. It just doesn't get advertised because nobody earns a commission when you simply keep your own money safe. 17. Credit ran on your name, not your number. At the corner store, your grandfather had a tab. The grocer wrote it in a book, carried him to payday, and charged him nothing, because the whole thing ran on one asset the modern system cannot price: his reputation. Credit used to be a relationship between two people who knew each other. Then it became a number generated by a company you will never speak to, sold to lenders who set your rate by algorithm. Same need, different owner. The handshake charged no interest. The algorithm charges 22%. 18. The house earned its keep. Your grandparents took in a boarder. A spare room was not wasted space, it was income every month from an asset they already owned. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that a home is only a thing you pay for, never a thing that pays you. There is an entire ape economy now built on renting out that exact spare room, except it takes a cut of every dollar and your grandmother took all of it. The rule never changed. The middleman just showed up and put a logo on it. 19. When the money failed, they made their own. During the Depression, when the banks closed and dollars simply were not there, hundreds of American towns printed their own local scrip so people could keep trading, keep eating, keep working. By early 1933, about 500,000 Americans were spending it. One California pharmacy made change in clamshells. Washington moved to stamp it out fast, flooding the country with federal notes, because a town that can make its own money is a town that needs the banks a little less. Every local currency, every community credit, every fight over who gets to issue money traces back to those Depression towns. They already ran the test. It worked. And the 20th rule is the oldest one of all. They traded without money. The mechanic fixed the dentist's car. The dentist fixed the mechanic's teeth. The farmer paid the roofer in eggs and labor and a side of beef. And nobody opened a banking app because no money ever changed hands. Barter built half of small-town America, untaxed, uncounted, and completely legal between neighbors. It still works the instant you stop assuming every exchange needs a dollar and a platform in the middle. Your grandparents had a word for all 20 of these rules. They did not call them strategies or hacks or financial literacy. They called it common sense. Here's the part that should stay with you. The math your grandmother used on a Friday afternoon has not changed. Seeds still grow, tools still last. A dollar saved before it can be spent still becomes a dollar you keep. None of this requires an app, an advisor, or a subscription. It requires knowing that the system you live inside was built with specific incentives, and those incentives were never yours. Every one of these rules was replaced by something more profitable for somebody else. That is the only reason they disappeared. So try one this week. Just one. Pay yourself first on Friday. Ask for the cash price. Plant the seeds. Fix the thing instead of replacing it. Then come back and tell me your grandparents were wrong. We document the systems that disappeared while nobody was watching.